Welcome to the Model Car Hobby Headquarters Unpodcast with your host, Luka C. Now here he is, Luka C. Well, hello, my fellow car modelers. How are you doing today? We've got a great guest on the show today that I'm very excited about because he's kind of like one of my heroes in the hobby for the past, lots of long time. Since I started back in the 80s, I picked up a scale auto one day and there was this really cool race car on the cover there. And I always and at the time I drove a Trans Am. So caught my attention. I always like SCCA. And I heard about this Randy Derr guy who, if you've kept up with the hobby and know who he is and seen his work, well, it speaks for itself. So we've got Randy here today. Randy, thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, geez, I appreciate you taking the time. And, we'll just go ahead and get everybody who watches knows me. There's no need for me to talk. I want to hear your story. Let's go way to the beginning. And what the heck got you interested in building model cars and when did you do it?
All right. Well, I got interested in cars first when my dad took me to some of the local short track, dirt track racing in Iowa. That's where I grew up, was in Iowa. And
there's a lot there.
Friday night, Saturday night, sometimes even Sunday night dirt track races. So I got really interested in cars that way. And what got me started in model building was also my dad we were into slot car racing at the time. That was big in the early to mid 60s. And he always had a few model kits around because he would take the bodies and adapt them to the slot car chassis, and we'd race those. And so one quiet summer day in the afternoon, I knew he had a kit up on the top of the refrigerator he was saving to use the body for a slot car, and I just called him at work and asked him if I could build that as a model. And luckily he said yes. And that's where it all started, building that model.
What model was it?
It was a Johan Ram Chargers Hodges Dodges. So I just don't remember precisely, but I remember that was the livery for it.
That was a neat time period for model car building, and with the slot car racing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so I was about 7 years old, I guess, at that time, maybe 8. And that's where it all started. One of the other early cars I built was a 65 Ford Galaxy, was into a stock car. And then after that, it's kind of all a blur. There were a lot of models between then and now.
So you never went through a point that you weren't building models, or you just did it right into adulthood, through college, business, family, whatever?
Yes,
to now? Really?
Pretty much kept after it all those years. I built about 3 or 4. Actually, I started my 12 scale scratch building work when I was still in high school. One of the first ones I built was took the Ferrari 312B Formula One car and used the engine and drivetrain from that and built a Can-Am car, because I was going to the Can-Am races in those days. Dad and I would go to Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, to the Can-Am races, starting in '67 when the race series started, and all the way through the end of it in the '70s. So had a lot of interest in the Can-Am cars, and took that kit and turned it into a Can-Am car. Also built through college, and then after getting married and having children, just kept after it. Now, obviously, the output wasn't too great sometimes. There were a lot of years there where the kids and their school work and school activities took precedent, but always kept building something. And then when they got older, graduated, went off to school, and moved out of the house, then I was able to get back into it around about 99, 2000 time frame. And since then, I've been doing it a lot more time typically on the models than had for a while.
And you have, but even before that though, in your so-called slowdown time, you created some pretty amazing pieces that were like on the cover of Scale Auto, because
Well,
Scale Auto comes around in the late 70s and really changed our hobby so much.
yes,
And
it did.
that's kind of what created many of which I'm consider you one of them, the legends of this hobby.
Well, thank you. Yeah,
The guys that really made an impact doing something, just mind blowing and so inspiring. Inspiring is the
thank
thing.
you.
That was what was great about Scale Auto, and would put out, like, I actually got this issue and saw it after I was already buying Scale Autos. I had missed this issue, and then I picked it up later on, at a swap meet,
Hmm.
and gee whiz, I saw that car and who's this guy? And I actually got this issue and saw this car and read about it. Just shortly after that, your Penske '69 Camaro
Oh,
popped up,
yes, yes, that
and
was
that
in,
that was the one. That was the one
yeah.
that really launched your fame in the hobby.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Everybody talked about.
Yeah, that's a favorite. Actually, that white Trans Am on the cover that you've been showing, interesting story behind that.
Oh, I'd like to
Um,
hear that.
I had gotten back from getting my master's at Purdue in mechanical engineering, and it was about 1983, if I remember correctly,
Hmm.
and entered a couple of local model car contests because I had continued to build, and came up short in those contests. Finished second
Really?
to John Wise and
Hmm.
to Tom Krieger, a couple other names
Oh
from the
yeah,
hobby.
yeah, yeah.
Both good friends. They've now both passed away, but they were tremendous builders in the day. John Wise actually was a regular in uh, the contests that were the national ones,
Hmm.
MPC contests. He was a regular in those, and so I finished second to those guys. And I sought out the judges to find out what I needed to do to improve. And turns out the judges were none other than Bill Coulter and Wayne Moyer, a couple
Oh
of names
boy.
from the hobby. And kind of this area I'm living in was a hotbed for model cars at the time
Oh
with
yes,
all
it
those guys
was.
here. And they said, well, your work's pretty good, but it needs more detail. And at the time, I was leaning more towards just the overall effect and not really getting into a lot of the detail. So, all right, if it's detail they want, it's detail I'll give them. And that's what prompted the building of that Firebird.
Yeah,
And
that's some detail too.
yeah, it had some detail in it for the time period. It was full up. So that's what the story behind that one. And then the Penske Camaro is also a result of my meeting Bill Coulter and working with him over the years. And I had told him, if there ever is a good kit of a '69 Camaro, I'm going to build that Penske Camaro. And one day the doorbell rings, Bill's at the door with a very large package, and it's
Oh,
the monogram kit had just been released. He had gotten an advanced copy of it, and he goes, "Here you are, no more excuses. You got to build that Penske
oh
car now."
boy. Were you thinking large scale, or were you thinking 24th, 25th scale at that time when you wanted to your
Probably
concept of the
was,
car?
yeah, probably was thinking the 1/25th, 1/24 scale, but 1/12 is not a concern because the Firebird you showed is 1/16. I've built a lot of 1/12 scale stuff with the Tamiya kits over the
Hmm.
years, so 1/12 it was. Gave me a
Yeah.
chance to get a lot more detail in and make it a lot more accurate.
Well, this was before the Revell, which I believe is taken from that old monogram big
That
scale. Um,
somewhat, right, right.
when they reduced that down to 25th scale and came out with it in the early 90s. So this was before that. So
Yeah,
there
this
really
was
wasn't a good '69 Camaro at the time.
no, there was not. Monogram had one that was pretty terrible, and I think that might have been it. The 1/12 scale kit came out, and I built that Penske car in the late 80s. I
Hmm.
think I finished it about in 91, 92, somewhere in there. I think I started it maybe in 1990, actually.
Oh,
But,
really? Yeah, that thing was spectacular,
well, thank you.
and yeah, the amount of scratch building you had, because especially going with that scale, you had to make everything. There was not a lot of available pieces and parts, and there weren't aftermarket companies making stuff for the
Yeah,
large scale stuff. Everybody
very
concentrated
true.
on 24th and 25th.
Right, right, very true. Now, fortunately, the Penske Camaro was heavily based on the 302 Z28,
Hmm.
and the monogram kit was also the same version of the Camaro. So engine and intake system all was mostly there. Had to redo some interior parts because the race car had base interior door panels, whereas the monogram kit was the up level Z28 door panels. I had to make, of course, the roll cage, the some of the suspension pieces had to be remade just for accuracy more than anything.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the very familiar mini light wheels
Oh
and
yes.
the racing tires. So some good scratch building work available there for that
Yeah.
one.
And something that you and I talked about, I'm lucky enough to have one of those mini light wheels, one of your
Yeah,
casts.
yeah, one of the
Um,
early ones.
one of the early
Yeah.
ones, and I have, we've discussed this, you and I, but I have a background, very up close and personal background with some of the old Trans Am cars with a shop I worked at. So
Right.
I've been very close to those mini light wheels, and some of the detail you have in that you captured, you nailed it. Just the wheel itself is just remarkable because there's detail in it that I think even model companies would miss, that you got, like that flat embossment that's on it. And
Yeah. Well, thank you.
yeah, that's, I remember seeing that going, wow,
Well,
that's
and
amazing.
that's the way I look at it, is those little details get noticed, and that's what helps the parts look a lot more realistic in the end.
Yeah, well, it was like said at Atlanta this year or last year. It's now
Yeah.
when you with your Corvette that we'll be talking about a little later. Is when they announced you winning.
This gentleman gave me a piece of information years and years ago. He says, when you're going to build a model, every piece of that model is a model in itself. Randy Derr, would you bring up your 1974 Ensign Greenwood Corvette?
That's something that a lot of people go with in this hobby, or some people don't think about, is if you
Mhm.
treat every little piece, the starter, the wheel, anything, as its
Right.
own model, you're
Right.
going to have a creation like what you come up with.
Well, thank you. Yes, that's the philosophy, and it's served me well over the years. And
Yeah.
it's sometimes difficult to remember when you're well into a project and you just want to finish it, but you have to stick with it from that perspective so you get the results you want.
Oh, absolutely. With that Penske Camaro, how did you do the flaring of the fenders to get it like the way the real car is? Because the neat thing, uh, and just for everyone out there who doesn't know, Trans Am rules the back in the day, you could make all the room in the world for wide tires, and they at the time around 69, 70, they were kind of constantly changing the rule on the width of the tires. So
Hmm.
you didn't know how far you need to go. That's why when Jerry Titus and TG Racing, when they built their factory Pontiac Firebird, they had those enormous flares on the back because they wanted to have the room.
Right,
So you
right,
could flare the car as much as you wanted, but from the side view, it had to look factory stock. So you had to keep that. Basically, the flare has to vanish, and it looked like a factory Camaro driving from the side.
right.
And
And
you created
also,
that.
well, thank you. And also in that year, they could not add any metal to make those flares.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what they ended up doing was, you're very familiar with the inner fender well construction and
Hmm.
the vertical pinch weld. They they took that apart on the real car, and they hammered those flanges flat and then butt welded them back together. So they gained over an inch of inner fender well clearance, and then the outer fender they just pulled away. On the model, of course, the inner fender wells I could add plastic to because I wasn't
Yeah.
under the same rules restrictions. For the flares that you see on the outside, I took 30 thousandths or 40 thousandths thick sheet styrene and just added it, shaped it, and added it to the outside of the fender and blended it in with putty. And
That's
then after
awesome.
that was all set and cured, and I had the body work the way I wanted it, went back in and with a Dremel tool ground away the plastic from the inside to leave just the single thickness.
That's awesome. Yeah, that, and you created that. What was beautiful about that car was that not like a lot of them had a bubble flare. It was
Mhm.
just a nice, smooth, almost not noticeable.
Correct.
Nice. That's what was so cool. Like the way later on in NASCAR by the 80s they started doing the flares on the cars like that. This is so, that car was so ahead of its time with things like that, with body modifications.
It was in
It
a lot
kept
of
it,
ways.
yeah, it kept it so still stock appearing. But yeah,
Right.
give that clearance. Yeah, and
Yep.
you did, and I love you kept that, and they kept that very distinctive character line that 60 only 69 Camaros had.
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
Correct. They
and you,
did retain that.
yeah, that you kept that line perfect, which is I basically read about how you did that, and that's
Mhm.
how I created flares on the Chaparral Camaro I did way back when.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, I also had these character lines I had to keep still flowing into the flare.
Right.
And wow, that's a difficult thing. It's not that
It,
easy to do.
it
Just
can be, yeah.
keep it nice and straight and everything.
Yes.
But yeah, you build up, and I've done some videos in the past of how to do flares, and that's one of the techniques I did in a video where you
Mhm.
build it up and then grind from behind. And that
Right.
I stole that from you, my friend.
Oh, well, thanks.
I'm giving credit to you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, but that model was just that was the one that really got a lot of people talking.
Oh, well, thank you.
You know, and then when we had a mutual friend, Dave Tom, who
Correct.
was really the guy who started the vintage racing side of all that old Trans Am stuff.
Yes.
And he was the owner of the Chaparral Camaro and
Right.
many other cars.
Yep.
And he was the one, he talked about you all the time.
Oh, well, thanks.
That's
Well,
how
he was very helpful because at the time he was
Yeah.
living in Cincinnati. I'm here in Dayton area, and he had a car that was built with a lot of resemblance to the Penske cars.
Yeah.
I think there were some people that built that car that had either worked for Penske or had studied the Penske Camaros. And so I was able to go to Cincinnati and get a lot of measurements and photographs of that car before he restored it. It's the University of Pennsylvania car, which is another famous vintage Trans Am car.
And it's still running today.
It is, yes. And so he was very helpful. And David and I have kept in touch through the years. He was here back in 2016 for the concours with one of his vintage stock cars, and we
Oh,
talked.
yeah.
We talked again. Yeah, the Mercury. So
Yep, the Mercury.
so yeah, David was very helpful.
Yep, he was. That's how he was. He didn't build models, but he was very interested in the hobby. Really liked us model builders, and
Yeah.
that's how him and I became friends. And I got the great opportunity to do a project with him where I had to do the Chaparral Camaro and got to have the real car to go over anytime I want over to his house and look at it and
Nice.
touch it and measure and
Yeah.
get his approval. Okay, did I make these right? Well, yeah, but you need to do this. All right. And I'd go back and work on it, go back, get his approval on it. So he helped me out a lot with those flares.
Very good. Yeah,
And
very good.
yeah, that I hated seeing that car go, but you know, he moves on to other projects, and that car is real special to me.
Yeah.
I got a neat opportunity to be around it. But
Sure.
you know, and then being with that, I got to see, you know, all the Penske Camaros up close, and those cars are just fascinating, and those guys did such a great job keeping them alive and keeping them going and put on their events that they do even today.
Yes. Yeah. Very special time in motorsports.
It was amazing time, especially that series. It just,
Yes.
the fact that these cars were the closest thing to being showroom stock, but yet there was so much innovation in them. A lot of people don't realize it was more than just throwing a roll cage in a stock vehicle.
Well, if you wanted to go fast, it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, because they had all kinds of little tricks on those cars.
Yeah.
The oil injection port, so that they could hand Mark a pressurized can of oil, and he'd plug it in the interior and refill the wet sump. They didn't have dry sumps in those days.
That's right. That's right.
You know, and then they also had a special tool that loosened and tightened all 5 lug nuts all at once. It was a gear wrench kind of arrangement. It turned all
Yeah.
5.
And it had
So,
like a spring-loaded ring that flew the old lugs off or something
yeah, I
like
believe
that.
so, or held them in place, one or the
Yeah,
other.
something like that. Yeah, they were,
Yep.
especially the Penske teams, they were always doing crazy stuff or playing with the big tank of fuel where they
Yes.
would have it submersed in acetone so that it would be really cold when it goes in, so they
Right.
get just maybe another gallon in there.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, my favorite though was the switch in the interior that he'd throw, and it would divert the engine vacuum to the pressure side of the brakes and pull the caliper pistons back so they could just pop out the brake pads and put new
Yep.
ones in and go
And a
right
pit
back at it.
stop. Yeah, quick brake change right there at the
Right.
pit stop. Yeah, that was on the 68 Camaro, I think, that of Donahue's, wasn't it? Well, they did it on all of them, didn't they, after
I
that?
think they did. Once they invented it, I think it probably carried over. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think it ever got outlawed. Yeah, because didn't they have like a couple of vacuum reservoir tanks like on the floorboard on the passenger side or something?
May have. I
I
don't
can't
remember
remember.
that in the
But
69, but yeah, that's very likely.
I remember that whole thing. That's just incredible. Yeah, the innovation. It was such a great time in racing, but the Trans Am series just had some of the greatest innovation. That's why it pulled the greatest drivers to
Yes.
compete in that.
Yep.
It was
Very true.
It was an amazing time, and you
Very
just
true.
captured it with that. And then
Well,
even
thanks.
on like you back to the carb that you did before that Firebird. Is that a like your own creation? Just looking at what they are, or was that a model of an actual car?
That is not a replica. That's my own interpretation of a Trans Am car of that period of time, 83, 84 timeframe when I built it. I was working with some of the race teams at that time through my work, through my job, and got familiar with some of the vehicles, studied all the different suspensions and chassis and interior and brake setups, and just copied all of that to build my own.
Oh yeah, I could tell that. Yeah, you definitely that model is looks like it's built by an engineer that knows the engineering of chassis and stuff. That's kind of like my geek out thing. I love race car suspension and chassis and stuff.
Yep, it's fun area.
Yeah,
And
that is just...
actually, that model, when I took it to the IPMS Nationals at Indianapolis in 1985, I remember encountering Bob Kleidenst, who is a very active IPMS member at the time. And he also was very heavily involved in the Indianapolis Museum.
Oh.
And good guy to know a lot.
Yes.
And he was a very accomplished model builder as well. And I remember him telling me that was a great model. The only thing that would make it better is that if it was a replica of something else, of something that actually existed. And I took that to heart. And since that time, all of my serious creations have been replicas, simply because there's a lot more challenge to building a replica.
It is, because you have to stay, I mean, with something that you make up, you can do whatever you want.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people don't fully appreciate how that notches up the level of work required, because you can't just say, well, that didn't work out, I'll do something else. You have to make it look exactly like the full-size car you're replicating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes that's a challenge.
It's a challenge, but as far as I'm concerned, and I know you feel the same way, that's a part of the fun of that.
It is. Yes.
It's like, yeah, some may call it rivet counting, but we're rivet counting ourselves when we're doing it. So it's not a bad thing. It's fun to rivet count yourself when you're taking on the challenge of wanting to create in scale an actual car and be true to that real vehicle.
Yes. And
it's hard.
As we talked earlier, the research part of building replicas is as much fun for me as the building of the model.
Oh yeah.
Going out and finding all the information you can. Best case scenario, like you with the Chaparral Camaro, if you have access to the actual car, nothing better than that.
Yeah, that's the greatest thing.
All the photos and measurements, and really understand the car so you can build the replica.
Yeah, that definitely that definitely is always a really choice thing to be able to do. That kind of just makes the build that much funner and that much
Yes.
more dearer to you, or your heart, a little closer to your heart, even more so when you get to actually get up and close and personal with the real car, and
Right.
that challenge of building that car.
Right. And the people you meet through doing that,
Yeah, definitely.
the present owners, maybe some people that had worked on the car in the past and can share information with you. There's a lot more human connection with your project than just gluing together some plastic and painting it.
Yeah, that's so true. You're watching the Luka C channel on YouTube. One last thing I gotta mention about that Firebird, and we'll move on, is something that also caught my eye with it back in the day. Is it reminded me of a particular race car that was local here, and then I also had a little bit of connection to. It reminded me so much of Dennis Meekum's car.
Okay.
From back the Meekum, they would call it Meekum Motorsport Edition or whatever, and it was a white Trans Am. I don't know if you recall that car. If that's what you were getting any inspiration from. But
don't recall that at the time. I remember the Meekum Racing team at various times.
Because I don't live very far, or ever lived very far from Meekum Racing, and even the Meekums were right down the street from us.
Yeah. The story behind the markings and the color of that car is kind of an interesting one. The car was originally going to be painted red.
Oh, really? Red interior.
And with the red interior. And as I was working on it, back in those days, I was using Tester's spray enamel, as most people were. Remember, this is the early 80s still. And I had some problems with the red paint. It just didn't work out. So I ended up re-primering it. And up to that point, I'd been putting black primer on it, because that's what I used, was just flat black paint for primer, so I could see the contours. And for whatever reason, after cleaning up all the mess from the paint problem, I sprayed it with some flat white, and the whole body detail just popped out in that white color.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, I've got to paint this white. There's no reason not to at this point. So, and Tamiya had just come out with their acrylic paints at that time. So I got some of their gloss white and airbrushed that car with their gloss white, and it was really super shiny compared to anything else on the market. Nobody was polishing paint to speak of in those days. I don't think the LMG kit was even out yet. So
no.
Micro mesh. And so the car just looked great. And then the black striped graphics on the bottom are just an expansion of the production Trans Am strobe stripes that they used in 1983 and 4, maybe just 1984 if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I remember those.
I just expanded it up to the belt line rather than just having it down at the sills. So that's how that one came about.
I love the look of it. Like I said, it reminded me of Dennis's car.
Yes.
And when Dennis, here in town at Meekum Pontiac, they were very famous for doing what they called their Macho TAs, and then later on they called them Magnums, or just MSE Motorsports Editions. Yep. And that was kind of a striping, very similar to something that he used to do on their cars they sold at the dealership. And I had a high school buddy of mine that bought one, and his was white with black on the bottom.
Yep.
And so it just reminded me a lot of that, and that's what first attracted me. And I love white race cars anyways. I'm a fan of white race cars.
Yeah, and they always look nice.
They do. There's just something about it. A lot of people think it's just kind of boring, but I don't know. I get a thing about a white race car.
Sure.
But that's kind of interesting that was a kind of a happy accident.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
And that's another philosophy of model building that I try to share with people. It's not the mistakes you make, it's how you recover from them.
Oh,
that really is important.
Yes, very much. I try to recover as much as I can.
Yep.
I seem to be recovering more than not having the problems lately,
right.
but we just got to forge on.
Yeah, there's going to be mistakes. So
Yep, it happens.
You know, you've got to figure out a way around them as you encounter them.
Yep, that's right. So then after the Penske car, what was like your next big project you took on?
Wow. I may even try to remember. I think it would
Because
have been the AJ Foyt number 51, the USAC Camaro that he
yes.
won. Actually, that was his last major series title, was 78, 79 USAC stock car championships in that car.
Yeah, that was
And
a beautiful looking race car.
it's a
That got
neat
on the
little
cover
car.
of Model Cars magazine, right?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. I encountered that car at a local car show. This was after AJ had his big auction over in
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis. I think that was in the mid 90s. And somewhere around that time frame, I'm at a local car show at a local Chevy dealership, and there sat that car. And I took a few pictures of it. Didn't have enough film with me that day. Everybody remembers film. And I started building it thinking, well, this will be an easy build. I'll just take a monogram stock car chassis and put it under a Camaro body and be done with it. But as I started into it, I realized that car was a lot more complex than that.
Yes, it was.
And so it turned out the gentleman had bought it at AJ's auction, had brought it back here to the Dayton area. He was in the Dayton area at the time, and he owned it for a number of years. And I finally met him through a local race fan club and asked him if I could get some more reference information on the car. So I was able to go to his shop and photograph that car. I actually went back several times for more pictures, more measurements, and was able to duplicate that car then properly. And that one I did in 1/24 scale.
Yeah.
Because I think I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could put the level of detail into the 24 scale car that I'd been putting into like the 12 scale Penske car. And
I do believe you reached that goal.
well, thank you. Thanks very much. It was a fun project. It's a neat little car. I got to talk to several of the crew chiefs and people that had worked on that car through the years. Dick Hutcherson himself, I spoke with him because the chassis was a Hutcherson-Pagan chassis, and I called him at his shop in Charlotte and talked about the car a little bit. And there was a couple of questions he was unable to answer because they really just built the basic chassis and body work. And he referred me to Jack Starn out at AJ Foyt's shop. So I called there and talked to Jack, and he was able to answer my questions pretty well. So it was a fun project in that respect, and just a neat little car.
And that was a rear steer hutch car.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah.
So you just started with the monogram chassis out of the Thunderbird kits.
The front clip of that
Just
chassis, just for the front frame rails and the start of the suspension.
Mm-hmm.
The rear suspension and frame rails were all scratch built because it was leaf spring rear suspension.
Oh, it was. Yeah, I wondered about that.
Yep. And a lot of the chassis was scratch built out of evergreen plastic, and then that monogram Thunderbird front clip frame rails were grafted onto it. The roll cage and the front hoop and all that were just scratch built out of plastic and brass, and also of course aluminum panels were added to the interior and other areas of the car. The body was the monogram 1/24 scale Camaro, and had to fill in the T-tops and then add the fender flares.
Mm-hmm.
Much like on your Chaparral Camaro, I added
Yep.
those. I made a couple of balsa wood bucks and vacuum formed some basic flares that then were
Yes.
grafted onto the body. So, because those were rather unique flares on that Camaro, they
They
were
were.
more bulbous, shall I say, than allow them to cover those big NASCAR tires. And,
Yeah, definitely.
right. So that was a fun project as well, and had a good time building that one. That one I finally finished up in early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember when that one hit the scene. Because I remember that car very well. I remember the auction, And there was a photograph of the auction, like it was like up high where they had it. There must have been a balcony or something. Someone took a
Yes.
picture, and I saw that car sitting there. That it
Yes.
was, and I go, oh, it's getting sold, and I
Right.
wondered what was going to happen to it. And then when
Yep.
you came out with that, that car inspired a very close friend of mine to build the Richie Evans one,
Oh, yes.
and
Another
that,
famous Camaro.
yeah, and he wore his copy of Model Cars magazine out
Well,
looking at your car, and
uh,
you had him, and he ended up I will have to show you pictures. I'm showing pictures right now, but he ended up
okay.
going to the Talladega Museum, and he was a very accomplished painter, and he had an amazing talent that he could just look at any color of anything, and he could go into his mixing room and mix that paint and be dead on the first
What
shot.
an amazing
Very,
capability.
yeah, he had an amazing talent with that. He has since passed, but just an incredible model builder. And he went to the Talladega Museum. He was going to the Atlanta show. And he went to the Talladega Museum, took pictures of the car there, looked at the paint. At the time, I was his paint prepper. We worked at a custom paint shop. He
Okay.
came home. I watched him immediately. His first day, he mixed the paint up, did a couple of spray outs, looked at him. That's the one. That was the color that he painted the car. The following year, he went back to Atlanta, went back to the museum, placed the car on the model on the car, took a picture, and they were just a perfect match.
Oh, amazing.
But you're
capability.
yeah. He wanted to do that AJ car, and he saw yours, and he's like, "Well, then I'll do the Richie Evans."
Very good. All right. Well.
Yeah, that was a. There were. I mean, he was a Camaro. We were both heavy Camaro fans, and love those late '70s Camaros. I just love.
Oh,
and
yes.
I think they make them one of the most beautiful race cars. So
yeah, they had good proportions.
They do, and that caught my eye. You know, that I remember seeing that when I first saw the race car. That bubble flare. I know that the great a great race car builder, more NASCAR, Robert G. was real famous for building some Camaro race cars similar to that, and he would use Volkswagen Beetle fenders for those front fenders.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I wonder if that's what they used for that one.
Hard to tell.
Yeah. You
be.
just went ahead and got the shape down perfect.
Well, thank you. Yes, that was just the best way I could think of to do it. Was just let's vacuum form some bubble flares and add them onto the body till they look correct.
And then after that, was it you had a classic sprint car, or was it a midget? It was a
sprint car.
Sprint car.
Yeah, that one came about in I think it was the summer of 2005. The local model club had a meeting, and it was a field trip meeting. And we went to a race shop in nearby Xenia, Ohio. And that was the race shop of Mutt Anderson, who was a very famous USAC sprint car owner, crew chief, builder. And we're in his shop looking around, and there sits this absolutely beautiful pearl white with red and blue markings, number 51 sprint car, small block Chevy powered. And it was the car driven by Roger McCluskey to the 1966 championship. So I took a few pictures of that, thinking that would make a great project. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it really needed to be done in the big scale.
Yeah.
So I went back and told Mr. Anderson what I wanted to do and build the model. And he handed me a stack of Polaroid photos taken from when the car was first theirs in 66, 67. It was, some of them were in pieces, some of them were finished views of the car. Also gave me some pictures of the restoration when they restored it then in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I scanned all those photos in and gave them back to him. And that was another great relationship. Mr. Anderson and his two sons and his grandson were very, very helpful through the course of me building that car. I went back to that shop numerous times for more measurements, more information, one time I went back, all I did was turn the steering wheel lock to lock, so I knew what the steering gear
Neat.
ratio should be. And but that was a wonderful project, and that was one where I challenged myself because it was almost all 100% scratch built.
Yes, it
And
was. Every nut and bolt you got on that thing. That's the thing that when I think about that model, I just think of the nuts and bolts that are involved in it.
Yeah, well, those I purchased.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's like that thing was all fastened together with nuts and bolts. It's just
Yes,
incredible.
yeah.
It's just
And
so
actually,
real looking.
the nuts and bolts were one of the reasons it was built in 12 scale, because I thought, well, I should do this in big scale. And so I listed in a spreadsheet all the nuts and bolt sizes that were commercially available, all the different small miniature ones that we use in the hobby. And I cross-referenced those in the spreadsheet to the full size nuts and bolts that a car like that would have, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/8 bolts, and scaled all those out to 1/16, 1/12, 1/8, so on and so forth. And all the bolts I could buy lined up real nicely with 1/12 scale.
Oh, awesome.
Scaled down. So that's how it ended up being in 12 scale, but it was a good choice anyway because of the other cars I built in that scale. So
Especially the fact that sprint cars are a little bit smaller than
True.
regular cars, even though it's always interesting when you walk up to a sprint car how actually enormous those things are.
they can be, yeah. And the dirt champ cars are even bigger.
Yeah, they are. They are.
They look like a stretched sprint car.
Oh my goodness, yes. There's a
Yes.
auto museum just down the street from me here, and they have a few of them there. A few
Okay.
different sprint cars and
Right.
the old ones, and they're neat to look at. And it's just, oh my goodness, these things are so huge.
Oh, they are. Yeah. And actually building that one was a little bit more challenging as well, because prior to that, I really knew nothing about sprint cars. I just surface understanding of
Hmm.
what they were, had seen them race a few times, but had never studied them like I had road racing cars, which was more my interest. And so I got to do a lot more research to be able to replicate it correctly. One thing I learned was that vintage of sprint car, there's not a lot of information out there on the internet, or there wasn't at the time,
Hmm.
because of the age of the people who are interested in those, I think,
Yeah.
primarily. But went to one of the old timer events at Winchester Speedway over in Indiana, and was able to get a lot of good pictures of intake systems and wheels and tires and contingency markings and all the different details that I needed for that car. Then, of course, having access to the restored car helped immensely too.
Yeah. What a learning experience for you.
It was good, yes. And I also, on the modeling side, I learned how to do resin casting, how to do photo etch parts, how to make my own dry transfers, learned how to work with brass. That was the first car where I used a lot of brass. Made a resistance soldering rig so I could solder all those little tiny brackets onto the frame,
Oh yeah.
make all the little different pieces. I knew a torch or a soldering iron wasn't going to cut it. So I did some research and ended up building a resistance soldering rig that was just perfect for that.
Oh wow. That's
Yeah,
that's incredible.
a lot of new skills learned on that model.
Yeah, that was that thing. Yeah, it was like we hadn't heard from you in a while, and then that popped up.
Yeah, well, that one took a while. I
Yeah,
started it, 2006, I believe, and finished it in 2011. So it was about a 5-year project with a lot of other things in between.
Yeah, yeah. I asked you that question earlier. It's like, so in these spectacular models that you hit the mainstream, viewing public with them, but you got all these little ones you do in between. You sent me a cool picture of an interesting little model that you did. That you said this was the one before you took on the Corvette.
Oh yes,
What was
right.
that?
Yeah, the Dale Earnhardt driven Challenger kit car.
Yeah, and that is
Yes.
for you. That's like what some of us would build just a box stock slump buster.
Well, that's kind of
That
what it
thing-
was.
Yeah, but I mean, I have to say this. Hope nobody takes this wrong, but that's kind of dumbed down model for you, B, that it was flat black, but it's still, you took it to, there was things I noticed in the pictures you sent me,
Hmm.
like the blue that's on the hood of the car and the
Yes.
little graphics in there, that all the pictures I've ever seen of the car, they were always black and white. So I was not really aware of that blue
Ah,
feature that the car had, and
yes.
you had that on there. And
Yeah, it was the 70s graphics from that era.
yeah,
All the pinstripe that just wandered around
yeah,
and crossed
the
back over on itself and all
yep,
that. Yes.
I always love
Uh,
that.
I found a photo or two of that in some old race car magazine. I don't even remember whether it was Stock Car Racing or whatever. And they had a picture of the car with its hood up in the pits, and that's where I had the best
Oh
view
boy,
of that hood.
lucky shot, huh?
Lucky shot,
And
yes.
you obviously found colored pictures of it, because I was unaware of the blue that was in it. Because like I said, I've only seen
Ah,
black and white shots of that car.
right, right. Yeah, Petty Blue, because
Yeah.
it was built by the Pettys for Chrysler,
Mm-hmm.
and it was their development car for that whole kit car program. And
Right. Right. Yeah.
Pete Hamilton drove it on the paved tracks to develop it, and Dale Earnhardt Sr., very unknown at that time,
Yeah.
but a fairly accomplished dirt track, short track racer. He was paid to drive that and do the development on the dirt tracks.
Yeah.
So he never raced it competitively, but he did a lot of laps in it, developing it so that they could offer that as a kit to the
Yeah.
public.
That was a very neat program, very popular program. There was a lot of those cars on the local Saturday night tracks through the 70s and 80s,
Yes,
and
it
we got
was.
some cool models out of it,
Yep, that's right. The
which
Cushman
are,
car,
yeah, those
and
were extremely accurate,
right, and the
especially for
Petty
the
Dart.
times when
Right,
those came
correct.
out. I love those
Yes.
kits. And and that car today is restored. They've painted it in the Petty blue with a 43 on it, but that car is
Okay.
alive and well today.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's good to know that that car didn't get destroyed.
Yeah, definitely. Because boy, heck, we talk about always wanting to build these replicas of these old race cars and stuff like that, and it's so cool, the guys that find them and restore them, and sometimes they're really in rough shape when they get them, because at the time, especially when you talk, like you said, when you talk to Hutch about the AJ Foyt car, or you
Right.
have to talk to a bunch of people and get a little information. Nobody
Right.
remembers a lot of stuff, because that thing was just a hammer to these guys. It was a
Right.
tool to get the job done. They weren't into it like we were, as far as that's concerned.
Yep. That's correct. But it is neat
It is
because
so neat.
so often they really seem to appreciate the fact that somebody all these years later knows enough about that car, something that they did work on, and is interested in hearing their stories about it. So
Yeah.
another neat aspect of the hobby.
Before we get into the Corvette, was there
Okay.
anything else any major projects from that sprint car onto the Corvette that you were working on, or did you
Uh,
start something and go, well, no, I think I'll move on to this Vet?
no, there were just some easy ones, so to speak.
Hmm.
After building the sprint car, I had kind of stored up a few projects in my head that I wanted to do. Uh, uh, the Dragon Pattern Works Chaparral
Hmm.
2E, wanted to build that. So that resin kit, put that together. Gosh, I'm trying to remember what all I built. A Myers-Manx dune buggy.
Oh,
Uh,
cool. I'm getting
but
ready to
it,
build one of those.
yeah, it ended up being a pseudo replica because there was a designer for Volkswagen of North America at the time. I think his name was Derek Jenkins, if I remember correctly, and he had built a rather unique Myers-Manx vehicle for his fun on the street, and it is featured in a few magazines and on the internet. And I duplicated that more or less. It was quite a unique little model.
Oh, it's cool. Yeah, well, then this takes us into this Corvette that
Yes,
I don't know if you debuted it at the Atlanta Acme show, but
that
that's when
was
we all,
that was the first large show I took it to. I
yeah.
had shown it at our local club meeting. Actually, I finished it on a Tuesday. Our club meets on Tuesdays, so I
Hmm.
took it that evening and told them this is as fresh of a model as you're going to see. It was just
Yeah,
finished this
could
afternoon.
still smell the paint fumes and glue fumes, right?
That's right. That's right. Took it to Cincinnati show
Hmm.
and showed it there earlier in 2022, kind of in the middle of the year. But then the Acme show was the first big show to take it to. Yes.
But I saw the car. I saw that model was featured on Doug Whyte's channel,
Yes.
the Model Car Muse, and he did an outstanding interview with you, and you guys went over that model, and I was like, I was wondering if he's going to do another one. That thing, that thing's amazing. I cannot wait to see that thing in person.
Well, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm calling it a thing.
No,
That
it's
is,
all
that's
right.
more
I
than a
understand.
thing. And our very good friend of mine, you know, Tim Brown from Throttle Power, he just
Yes.
put out an outstanding video just covering that model.
Once in a while, you come across a masterpiece at a model contest. A build that's sitting on a table that just stops you in your tracks. Every piece is a work of art. Well, let's get the camera turned around. I will show you Randy Derr's 1974 IMSA Corvette. You happen to make some repairs, Randy?
Nope, just taking off some pieces to put it on display.
Oh, okay. A little pit stop, huh?
So people can see what's underneath the bodywork.
And
Yep.
as you're disassembling it to show at the show, and then he filmed you putting it back together at the end of the show, and you pick that thing up and show the
Yeah.
bottom.
Oh yeah, a lot of times it does, but sometimes physics side slip and things come over.
Oh my God.
Wow, that's a work of art all in itself. That's amazing.
I want a picture of that too.
Very nice.
It's just that model is just mind-blowing.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah, I felt a little bad. He's asking me these questions, and I got to admit, I was a little distracted. I was concentrating on taking it apart or putting it together, so
Oh,
my
yeah.
answers might have seemed a little cold. But yeah,
No,
it was a
he
great
understood.
show.
I know one thing before I saw his video, and we were talking about it. Tim and I talked quite a bit, and he was going. He was taking the wheels off with a tool to take the lugs off. I go, yeah, that's Randy. He had to take 5 each. Yeah, and he got it all in his video. That's just incredible.
Gotta
But
do it.
what realism on that one. And
Well,
again,
thanks.
every little part of that model car is a model in itself.
No, I intended it to be, so I'm glad that you see it that way.
Oh, absolutely. Something that I notice, and what gets me excited is with me having a real race car background, and some of my favorite stuff with race cars was the tin work on that car.
Oh,
All
thank
of
you.
the fabrication and the tin work that you did was spectacular.
Oh, thanks.
What
Thanks.
did you used real aluminum sheeting, I imagine, or
Yes, that's correct. Along the way, I had experimented with a number of different aluminums. Way back when Jim Drew and I collaborated on a series of tips and helpful things back for Scale Auto called Lowbuck High Tech Detailing. And at that time, I think he was using some of the aluminum from baking pans that you can buy at the grocery store. And so I'm always on the lookout for different types of aluminum pans or sheets or whatever. And I had tried a number of different ones. And what I ended up discovering was at the local dollar store, they sold a brand of quarter pans that had a whole flat unembossed bottom in them. So you got about a 6-inch by 8-inch piece of aluminum, and it had just the right thickness and temper that you could emboss it to put all the bead rolling in, and yet it would hold its shape and not be too soft.
Yeah,
So-
that's always a tough part, is finding too soft or too firm.
Correct, right. Because I have used aluminum flashing that you can buy at
Yeah.
the local home improvement stores, but that's way too hard to emboss to put the bead rolling in. So you need something a lot more malleable. And
Yes.
that's where these baking pans work out really well.
Yeah, and they have that grain to them that almost looks down to scale.
Yes, correct.
What aluminum looks like in on the real cars.
Yeah.
And I know I love a lot of tin work on a race car, the interior, the trunks, that always I have been wanting to do a model. And I've played with that. I have got sheets that I got. It's hard to get this stuff now. I was using printing plate from
Yep, I've
what they
heard of
used to,
that.
and
Yep, familiar with that.
that stuff is amazing if you get the right
Mhm.
thickness. But of course, the sheets that I have over the years, and I got a bunch. Oh, geez, this have to be in the early '90s, and I was
Mhm.
just handing it out to all my buddies, man, because I got so much of it, and I was like, I only have like 2 sheets now. And then
Uh-oh.
and my one sheet over the years, and I've also moved across country. Lived in many different houses since then. It's a little rough. It's hard to find a nice flat piece now.
Sure. Yeah.
But
So you'll have to go out and
uh,
search for the dollar
I'm
stores now.
I'm on the hunt for a new material to use
There you
because
go.
but
Yeah.
it is. I love using real. I love there's you can't get that look any other way.
No, you
And
really can't.
and your Corvette just has so much of it, and
Well,
it just
thanks. Yeah.
looks so fantastic. It looks
Yeah.
nice and sturdy. So
It's not too bad. Now, joining that aluminum is always a challenge. And
Yeah.
that's one thing I still need to develop is how to heliarc aluminum in
oh
scale.
boy. I just super glued, but that would be, if you figure out a way, I might
Yeah.
have to whatever it takes to get your secret on that, because
No,
that's the challenging part is getting all the, because especially when you're doing something complicated like a trunk area or all that, and it has to be
Right.
multiple pieces and they fit
Right.
together, and you can't
Yeah.
necessarily pop rivet them. There's nothing that small.
Nope, that's right. And super glued sort of kind of works, but
Sorta kinda
not much
works.
sticks to that aluminum for whatever reason.
No, it comes
even
apart
roughing it
very
up.
easy.
Yeah, it doesn't glue well. So that's the further challenge for anybody out there is 12 scale heliarc welding.
That's going to be real interesting. So Randy, there's a kind of a cool story about this Corvette, how you came about doing it, what you went through to get it as accurate as possible. You
Yes.
want to tell us about that?
All right. Well, I first saw that car race at Road America in the summer of 1975. It was in a little bit different livery in those days, but it was that same basic car, same chassis. And it was immediately put on my I got to build that someday list.
Oh, wow.
And now, all these years later, when it finally started bubbling back to the top again in about 2015, 2016, and I was out at NNL East and speaking to a friend of mine out there, Jan Hyde, who's a very accomplished vintage racer and is very well into vintage racing Corvettes. And I asked him about that car, if he knew where it might be. And he gave me a couple of leads on where I might be able to track that car down, because I was thinking that's going to be a good project in 1/12 scale. I think it's time to start another big scale project. So I made a few phone calls. I talked to a gentleman in California who owned that car in the 90s and into the 2000s, but then he sold it and it traded hands a number of times, and ended up speaking to a classic car broker in Florida, and he had just sold the car, and it was in France. It had been shipped to
Oh,
France
boy.
to a collector over there. I thought, well, that trail's cold now, but you just never know how things might work out. And about 6 months later, I had an opportunity to go to Germany for my work at the time. And I thought, well, Germany's not France, but France is a whole lot closer to Germany than it is to Ohio. So
That's
now's
for
the
sure.
time. So I contacted the gentleman who is the caretaker of the car over in France, and we made arrangements. And he invited me to stop by the race shop when I was there. So after I finished business in Germany, I flew to France, rented a car, and drove down to this race shop. It was just around the corner from the Paul Ricard Formula One circuit in the
Oh, wow.
southern part of France. And there the car resides and is taken care of by this gentleman. And he and his mechanic were there, and they were so helpful. The car was up on jack stands. They took off wheels and tires. They took off body panels for me.
Oh, nice. That's always the best.
Spent 2 full days crawling over or under that car, measuring things, taking pictures, making drawings. Still didn't end up with near enough information, but I had run out of time. It was time to
Yeah.
fly home. So that's how the research started on that car. And then the build started in late 2018 and finished it up then in the spring of 2022.
Wow. And was there ever a point in time, like, did you ever contact them for any extra little help, like something you might have not caught that you're like, when you're building the model, you go, ooh, I wish I would have gotten a good picture of that or a measurement?
I didn't bother him too much because he had been so helpful when I was there. I did a lot more internet research. That car was a little better documented than the sprint
Yeah.
car had been. And I found pictures. Interestingly enough, I also exchanged some notes with Bert Greenwood, who was John's brother.
Mhm.
And Bert had as much to do with building that car as John did at the time. I also found I had a book from Ron Fournier, a very famous race car fabricator, and he had built that car. And there were some pictures of that car, the chassis, when it was being built at his shop, in his book. So you just never know where you might find research information. And then late in the build, I was finishing up all the body work and getting ready to paint it. And I posted on Facebook a question about one contingency decal that was on the car.
Mhm.
And a gentleman answered my question, and he said, oh, by the way, here's a link to some photos of that car. And it was a whole album of photos that somebody had taken at their Daytona 24-hour race in 1975.
Oh boy.
And they had been posted on a university archive. And so there was about 24 photos of the car in that archive. And I realized I had to redo the rear spoiler a little bit because it gave me some different views of the rear spoiler.
Oh yeah.
Yep, and it gave me much better views of the markings and the overall shape of the car. So very helpful, even though it was late in the process. But yeah, I took over 1,000 photos of it when I was in France. And then I found about 1,500 more photos of stock Corvette parts and that racing Corvette, other racing Corvettes. I have an extensive library of photos and drawings and different pieces of information on that car now.
Wow. Yeah. And boy, that sounds like the cards just fell right into place for that build, for your research
Yep.
part of it.
Sometimes they do. Hyde was very instrumental in getting me in contact with the right people. Curiously enough, he was the same guy that got me in contact with the people that owned the Penske Camaro back in the
Oh,
late 80s. So Jan has been a big part of a couple of my projects.
nice connection there.
It's it's
Nice
who
to
you
have
know,
that.
right?
Yes, it's always great to have the opportunity to look at the real thing in person. And then,
Yes.
we've got the internet now. It's so much easier to do what you do
It
today
is.
with the research part, but it's still a challenge.
Yes, it is.
And yeah, but you keep digging and you find more stuff. But to get the opportunity to spend some personal time with the vehicle you're building,
Yeah,
that's priceless.
it is, because you get to understand the nuances of the car, and you really get to understand kind of the character of the guys who build it to some
Yes.
degree, and the type of work they did and how they thought and how they put things together. Now the car, as it was in France when I photographed it, it was not fully restored. It was kind of partially restored. I think it's still not fully restored back to the original. And so it's sort of an amalgamation of the original car and some of the iterations it's taken on over the years. And that's also one of the realities of replicating these old vintage cars, is you just can't find information sometimes.
Oh yeah, and then again, these cars back when they were just considered tools, like we talked about,
Right.
they could go through quite a few years of going through different divisions of types of racing, different sanctioning bodies, different
Yes.
rules, and of course advancements in racing, where
Right.
these cars will get retrofitted new type of safety equipment or new
Yes.
bars added, new different types of front end, rear ends.
Right.
And by the time you get the car and you're trying to bring it, like, well, in real car restoration, and that's when our opportunity today to get to see the real cars, because lots of times they're getting restored or restored back to what they started out as, and sometimes you can't quite get them back to the way they were
Right.
100% because
That
so
is
much
correct.
has been done to them. So
Yes.
I'm working on one right now that I want to replicate the car. Luckily, it was a car I actually restored, so I have a lot of good memories to,
Oh, yes.
and I took a lot of pictures when I was restoring it, but I knew back then a lot of the car was not accurate for the time period of what the car was. And I
Right.
want to restore it. I want to build the model as it would have ran back in 71, not in 2001 when I restored it. So
Right.
I've got to change a lot of stuff and still do research on the car, even though I had my hands on it. And that's
Yeah.
always a tough part to know what was the car like, or what did they have back then that they wouldn't have had that's on the car now. And sometimes
Right.
that can trick you up.
It can. And this was their first wide body Corvette.
Hmm.
And it was a development car that led into their customer cars that they built quite a few of.
Oh yeah.
So this car was modified multiple times by the Greenwood team over the few years that they owned it and raced it. And so it was part of the challenge of replicating this car was, how do I make the model look sufficiently rough, so to speak? Because
Yeah.
it was a development car and it wasn't a pristine restored race car. And that's
No.
what I was trying to replicate, was the rough and ready development car from 1974 and 75.
And you were trying to find, you wanted to get the car at that exact moment, that period of whatever time you picked too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I chose the markings, the livery of the car matches, and the exterior matches the car as it raced at the 1975 24 Hours of Daytona.
Yeah.
And so with all those archive pictures, that helped immensely with that. So I know exterior wise, curbside, so to speak, it's very faithful duplicate of that car.
Okay. Yeah.
And then everything else is, like I say, kind of a collection of all the different systems that were on it over the years.
Yep. So you just can do what you can do. But
That's right.
I think you got pretty close. I don't think anyone's going to argue with you on it.
Well,
I have a question about that. I could look over this model and have a list of questions up. How did you do that? And what did you use for that? But I have one I want to ask you that caught my attention that I'm going,
all right.
This is going to be a weird one. The duct tape around the headlights.
Yes.
I got to know what you use for that.
Well, curiously enough, I gave that some thought as I was building the model, is how we're going to duplicate that. And I collected all kinds of different materials to see what would work the best. And I had a really neat silver thin paper that I was going to use that I thought looked really good. But then when the time came to actually try to use it, it didn't go on the model well at all. So in the end, what I did was I took just white decal paper and I spray painted it silver to match duct tape silver, cut strips out of it and applied it to the model and used the Solvaset to blend it in.
Oh, okay.
So it was really simple. It was just silver painted decal.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Because I'll tell you, it's hard to scale down duct tape.
It is, yes.
I have done it many, tried to figure out many times and trying to get the look, and I've gotten close.
Yeah.
Sometimes, they just, it's nice. It's cool to do, sometimes some that they got just do that 500 mile an hour tape, they call it in racing.
That's right.
Just
Well, this
duct
car
tape.
had a lot of that. Because it did over 200 miles on an hour on the banking at Daytona. And so they taped the front of the roof down, they taped the headlight covers down, they had the hood taped down. They used a lot of that to get
Oh,
it
yeah.
smooth enough.
Every race team has rolls and rolls of that stuff.
Right. And that was in the day when it was all just silver. They didn't
Yeah.
color match it to the body.
Right. Yeah. And so that was like, oddly enough, that was like one of the things that really popped out at me.
Okay.
Fair
enough.
I have to know that. And you caught the look. It looked like duct tape on those things.
Well, thanks.
Totally to scale. That is just, I am looking forward to seeing that thing in person. And,
Looking forward to showing it to you.
But in the, like in Tim's video and in Doug's video, they captured what it looked like really well. And,
They did.
it was neat looking at that. It was great to see you back with something like that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, those two gentlemen are really good at their craft, and
Yeah, excellent
model building
videos.
and the videos both.
Oh yes, yes, and I had Doug on this show once. Was super honored at it. Had a blast with him. He's a
Yep.
neat person, and I talk to Tim all the time. Great people in this media that we have for
Yep.
our hobby and keeping everybody informed and keeping the hobby going like this. And is
Yep.
there a you got are you starting the plans for your next big opus that you're gonna do? Geez, I mean, you take usually someone will have like maybe one of those in their model building career, and this is like what, 4 or 5?
Well, I don't know. I've been thinking of different subject matter, and this one, nothing has gelled yet. I
Yeah.
haven't picked anything out. There's a lot of options out there. It will come down to probably what can I get access to,
Yeah,
and or it may even come down to just complete surprise, like the sprint car. That wasn't on my radar screen at all
just
until
happened.
until that club meeting, and then boom, there it was. It's like, I have to build that.
Yeah, it's
So,
that model car muse that,
yeah, and
gets you.
when you spend that many hours researching and building a car like that, you really have to be very much in love with the project, so to
Yes.
speak. You have to really be attached to that emotionally, because you're going to be
Yes.
spending a lot of time with it.
Yeah, and that's why I was for a while I was like, I want to do this and I want to have it for Atlanta next year or this year. I keep saying next year. It's the beginning
Yeah.
of the year now. I want to have it for Atlanta, and since one of their themes are NASCAR, it's like I got it. That's always been my, probably my biggest love is model building. Is I love building NASCAR models,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking, if I'm gonna do something that's gonna be like, I want to put it there next to guys like Clay Kemp and Wayne Stevens and Jay Severies, all them, and be able to, be proud to be next to those guys. I got to pick the right model. What's it gonna be? And it's like, I got to pick something that I truly, truly have my heart in, that I love, and
Yes.
it's a car that I actually, had my hands on and restored.
Oh,
Best way to go.
perfect.
So good thing I already have the research. I'm ready to go on this.
Yeah.
And you have been a big inspiration to make me take on this project.
Oh, well, thank you.
I do want to. I don't know if I'm going to go to the level you go. That there's just, I know how far I can go, but who knows what happens when I start building this thing.
Well, it's always good to challenge yourself.
Yep,
on these
it's always
projects.
good. If I don't
Just-
make it get it done in time, I'm not going to rush this thing. I got a real big passion for it, and you definitely, you hit it on the head. It is a project. You have to love it,
You
and it
do.
means something to you
Yes.
to be able
Absolutely.
to take them on like this, and yeah, replicating something that was real. I think is the funnest stuff in this hobby.
Yeah.
I love
is.
that. And
Well,
boy,
it-
you've
it's-
done it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah,
And it's neat. Then you can compare your model and the photos of it to the photos of the real car, and see the linkage there.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking forward to the next one when you start. Hope maybe I'll be able to kind of follow you along as you're doing that one.
Well, thanks.
And now
Yeah.
now that we have a little more like the media that we have and the internet,
Yes.
you could kind of keep people up with what you're doing when you start that next one. That's
be
always
happy
fun
to.
watching those work in progresses.
Yes, it is. I enjoy seeing those online as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Randy, don't want to take any more of your time. I sure do appreciate you coming on. This is a super treat for me, and great stories, great insight on all your models, and maybe hopefully have you back on sometime. We can talk about
Thanks.
more neat stuff. But
Yeah.
there's something that I ask every guest when they
Okay.
come on to my little Unpodcast here, is to do the sign off.
Uh-huh.
Are you aware of my sign off? Can you do it?
Just-
Do you want to take it on?
Just barely. Something along the lines of keep gluing your fingers together and cutting that styrene, and keep after it.
That's right. Hey, take it as your own. That's perfect. Thanks so much for coming on. This was fun, and what a great insight on fantastic models. Everybody, go over if you haven't seen it. I'll have a link at the end to go over to Tim Brown, the Throttle Power, and see that video that he took of did some great detail shots of this Corvette that Randy did, and also check out Model Car Muse. Doug had a great interview with Randy and showed that model. Just two excellent videos to check out. You gotta, if you haven't seen this model, you gotta see it. It is spectacular. All right, thank you so much for coming on, and we will see all of you in the next video. And as we say, here's the producers.